growth, transformed, resilient, empowered, confident, self-loving, healed, and alive are all words that initially come to mind when describing how oftentimes it feels to be fully recovered. When I first truly remember being able to break free from my eating disorder and no longer let it grasp me and control my life, I felt euphoric, a feeling of happiness that I never knew existed, like I had truly crossed the metaphorical line and made it to the other side. Now, being recovered for about 2 years now, I feel that same quality of peace and enlightenment in moments that I reflect upon my progress when I reach a new milestone or firmly silence the disorder's voice if it happens to be loud in a specific moment. Quite honestly, my eating disorder is oftentimes fully removed from my life. I can exercise for whatever amount of time that feels good for my body, eat my favorite foods guilt-free, and not think about food for over 70% of the day. I had let my eating disorder control my life for 9 years. Having an eating disorder feels like your own nonstop hell. You feel trapped, like the walls are constantly closing in on you, that you will never be good enough, never be thin enough, never be pretty enough. My eating disorder began when I was 13 and most likely started developing at 12. Comparisons to others, media influences, and my own body image struggles became breeding grounds for the disorder's grip to tighten. A very unfortunate doctor's visit when I was 13, still in puberty, triggered me to begin engaging in behaviors. All of this was happening on a personal level. My life was going through some pretty serious turbulent changes. I was grasping to hold on to the feeling of that I had control. I kept engaging in unhealthy behaviors, self-destructing and self-hating. I somehow managed to get a scale a couple of months after that doctor's visit, and later found out that I had taken things a little bit too far. I remember my parents telling me that I looked great, reinforcing my eating disorder and allowing it to grow. My parents would still warn me not to lose any more weight, as then I would look unhealthy. I sincerely tried to maintain my weight, but it was already too late. My eating disorder was running rampant and taking over my life. When it began to take over my personality and influence every single thing I did, I was sick of it. I had not been diagnosed yet, and even as I stood at the crossroads of acknowledging the problem, my mind concocted rationalizations to defend the indefensible. Admitting I had a problem was hard, but I remember doing my online research and I truly despised the way I was living. So I came forward to my mom, telling her that I read something online about the signs and symptoms of anorexia nervosa and that I pretty much checked every box off. I got my diagnosis and then was referred to an IOP program and a path towards healing. I think of my eating disorder, well, actually, I like to separate myself from it, and I personally named my eating disorder the Eating Disorder Ego Blob, EDEB for short, which is something so great and dark inside of me, this cruel eating disorder and this blob of negativity, all coupled into one simultaneous thing. It's quite scary, honestly. But once I learned how to separate and remove it from me, I quickly learned that I do not have to give in to those intrusive and irrational thoughts, which was all EDEB ever fed to me. My recovery journey was a labyrinth of relapses and determination, a struggle between the disorder's hold and my yearning for freedom. The experience of being hospitalized numerous times, watching my health deteriorate with my heart rate getting abnormally slow, and witnessing the financial strain it placed on my family underscored the gravity of my battle. It was a stark reminder that this disorder had an insatiable appetite, demanding more of me than I could ever give. I remember trying IOP, PHP, residential, outpatient residential. I remember, I'm sure some of you here today know how this goes. Nothing seemed to work. There was a time that I was taken in an ambulance, and because my heart rate was too slow, they had to transfer me to a different hospital. And I remember my eating disorder crying out while I was hooked up to machines and IV tubes that everyone else is crazy and being unrealistic, and that this is a joke and that you can't possibly be killing yourself already. But I was. I remember it was my second hospitalization at Texas Children's when the older male doctor told me that my heart rate was abnormally slow, which I knew it was, but my eating disorder felt oh so sickeningly powerful. The doctor then sincerely asked me if I knew what happened when a heart reaches 0 beats per minute. What happens, Nikki, when a heart no longer can pump blood to the rest of your body? You die, Nikki. That's what happens. You die. And as unbelievable as it may sound, your eating disorder will never be pleased and satisfied until there is no more of you. Something that took me a while to figure out and accept. Throughout my recovery journey, I encountered recovery and relapse in tandem, like a seesaw that never found balance. My disorder was an overpowering entity threatening to consume my identity and autonomy. I am a hard worker, though, and yearned for freedom. Each time I fell down, I would force myself to persevere. But, however, fueling recovery and relapsing simultaneously is a bit like attempting to push water uphill. Not only frustrating, but also exhausting. The disorder sometimes can feel like an impossible monster taking over your mind. You feel lost in a maze with every corner you take, a dead end to seemingly endless self-misery and self-abuse. Now, everyone experiences intrusive thoughts from time to time, and I've found the secret to not letting them control you is simply telling yourself that those thoughts do not serve a function. They are just thoughts, and therefore you always have the choice not to engage and dance around with them. Linden Oaks was where I found myself in 2015, going into my junior year of high school, but I was in the Chicago area on a summer vacation with my family, and of course the eating disorder was loud again. I guess I could argue that maybe traveling triggered some of it, but by that point I'd had an eating disorder for 3 to 4 years, so although it had morphed over time, as they do, it had completely changed my psyche and how I lived my life, because I wasn't living for myself anymore. I was living for my eating disorder. I was referred to a PHP program when I arrived at Linden Oaks, although I remember so badly wanting to only do IOP. But sadly, I even refused to be compliant in PHP, engaging in behaviors still and still not prioritizing myself. Even though I participated in the groups and enjoyed them, I would fail to apply any of the concepts to my life, or I would apply the concepts only halfway and continue to engage in behaviors, subsequently getting into inpatient. This was the first time I was put on a wheelchair for a prolonged period of time for my eating disorder, and I remember feeling so weak. I even fainted in the bathroom once. Soon I realized that I would be missing school yet again, the start of my junior year of high school, which I was really excited about. I stayed about 2 weeks in inpatient, and then they told me that the only way they will release me is if I go to the Arabella House, which was their outpatient residential group home at the time. Although I was missing school, I was excited since I had never been to residential before. And during that experience, I was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which was interesting. But during my time at Arabella, I learned how to interact with others, how to manage conflict, how to make exercise fun as opposed to a punishment, and how to comply to a meal plan. I ended up missing a lot of school during my sophomore and junior years of high school, and not to mention a lot of the extracurricular activities all throughout high school, since I was oftentimes on exercise restrictions for dance or in another outpatient program. I do give myself a lot of credit for self-teaching myself while I was in the hospital and at Arabella. Hard subjects too, like geometry and chemistry, as I was able to find my love for learning and hunger for knowledge. When I went to college, North Central College, I still had my eating disorder, but oftentimes I put my recovery on the back burner. But I still tried my best to prioritize my recovery when I knew I was slipping. I went to ANED meetings at the Linden Oaks Outpatient Center, where I learned a lot more about recovery and met my soon-to-be sponsor, who introduced me to Eating Disorders Anonymous, which is a 12-step group for the recovery of eating disorders, their motto being balance, not abstinence. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over our eating disorders, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of our higher power as we understood him. In my recovery and life now, I continue to take these first 3 steps daily, surrendering to the things outside of my control. I remember reading this powerful paragraph for the first time on step 2 of EDA. Removing our personality's bad parts so that only goodness remains doesn't work. Insanity cannot be removed. It can only be replaced with something stronger. When we're overworked, we need to develop trust that we will be okay even if we work less. When we're scared, we might need the courage to face our fears. We need the clarity to see that what we're really afraid of really isn't that scary after all. When we feel torn between different options, we need the willingness to choose one and let the others go. When we swing back and forth between extremes, we need balance. All of this takes time and practice. Very good life advice it was indeed. So the part of the paragraph that really spoke to me is that insanity cannot be removed, only replaced with something stronger. This can be, of course, true of our eating disorders, as they are arguably insane. I was not able to overcome my eating disorder until I replaced EDEB with the higher power. But I also think something similar is true about life and the things we truly cannot control. The world is arguably insane, and I think one way to overpower the unfavorable things outside of our control is to replace them with something stronger. In college, for the first time ever, my eating disorder started morphing into a different phase. Well, a different type of eating disorder, which was really challenging. I'd started to binge. I felt out of control. For anyone who knows what it's like to go from one type of eating disorder to the opposite, well, it's basically like your worst nightmare. At least it was for me. I couldn't understand why I would engage in this behavior and not be able to stop, although I wanted to so desperately. I soon learned that it's not uncommon for eating disorders to transform and morph through a wide array of different phases, as this is a part of the journey. And I eventually realized that I was engaging in that behavior to fill some of that metaphorical emptiness that I had at the time. So you may be wondering, how did I get from all these dark places to full recovery? Well, like I mentioned earlier, placing my trust in a higher power was really pivotal for me. And working the 12 steps during the pandemic really helped me place my recovery first, since I was at home with my family. Fueling my spirituality instead of ADAB was really transforming. I may be one of the few, but perhaps one of the many, who can say that quarantine actually saved my life. I remember in quarantine for the first time I was able to really silence and overpower EDEB when it was extremely strong. I had just gotten off the phone with my sponsor, and I was telling her how EDEB was telling me to restrict for the rest of the day. She told me, "Nikki, restricting will serve you no healthy purpose. You can do this," and challenged EDEB's thinking with, "What's the worst that could happen? Possibly, if you eat this meal." I still remember eating that meal in my kitchen in Texas. I was like, whoa, oh my goodness, the world didn't collapse? I'm okay? Although it did feel a little uncomfortable at first, I also mostly felt empowered. I was able to ask for wisdom and guidance from my higher power to allow me to not give in to EDEB. And from there, I was able to begin my recovery streak, overpowering EDEB any chance I could get. A continuous journey of coming back to and rediscovering myself. Forcing myself not to give in to edit and replacing every sick thought with a healthier one was also helpful. I believe that if you water something, anything really, it will grow. So instead of watering my eating disorder, which just grows and snowballs out of control into toxicity, I decided to water eating nutritious meals, exercising for emotional benefits, meditation, healthy relationships with people, and my spirituality. I am finally confident in my body again. I have found an overquality of peace that I never knew was real. I have grown through what I went through and truly outgrown my eating disorder. I'm too mature for it, quite honestly now. And I do feel very disconnected to the parts of me that were disordered, which is a good thing, as it has made room for my intuition and higher power. Now, of course, life is always hard, and being recovered, it turns out, doesn't make you any less immune to the stressors and pain of this world. But the difference is that now you have a better way of handling such challenges and ideally see obstacles as opportunities for growth. Now, I am a full-time social worker, mentoring and working with children in their homes and in the community, inspiring them to overcome their challenges and become the best possible version of themselves. I love helping others any opportunity I get to, and I truly feel like I'm living out my purpose each and every day. This is only possible for me to do because of my recovery. I've really come a long way, and I'm nowhere near the same person I was with a full-fledged eating disorder. Although I would sincerely not wish an eating disorder on my worst enemy, I am grateful. My higher power gave me a challenge, and I call my higher power God sometimes, that my higher power, or God, gave me a challenge that I could recover from, so that way I could find my strength, overcome it, and help others along their life journey. The part of me that had an eating disorder is quite honestly mostly dead. Now it still comes around occasionally for a visit, but with my newfound strength, I make sure it doesn't stick around for long, and I'm able to overpower it actually quite easily now. Something me 5 or 6 years ago would have never thought possible. But it took me lots of time, never giving up, determination, and unwavering strength to get to where I am today. I truly went through a transcendental transformation. I have metamorphosized into someone who is no longer weak but strong, who makes continuous efforts to remain in the present moment, who is spontaneous, resilient, and at peace. I wish the same transformation for all of you, no matter what you may be going through, as the other side of recovery is truly awe-inspiring, life-changing, and revitalizing.